everyone. Thank you for attending our program today. My name is Elizabeth Renwick. I am an MSW student and GTA at the NC State School of Social Work. We're excited to be discussing gun violence awareness, planning, safety, and campus procedures with our moderator and panelists. During our discussion, please feel free to keep your video on, but please remember to have your audio muted. At the end of the discussion, there will be time for you all to ask questions, either by unmuting or typing it in the chat. At this time, I'd like to introduce our moderator for today, NC State School of Social Work professor, Michelle Guarino, who will now be introducing our panelists.
Good morning, everyone. It's so great to see so many familiar faces, not only with our panelists, but also students. I so appreciate you guys being here. How we're going to open up today is by way of introduction, and I am simply going to call on our panelists by name, and I would like for them just to provide us a brief amount of information, who they work for, maybe some of their experience, and a little bit about why this topic is important in their line of work. So I will start with Brent Culberson.
Hey, good morning. My name is Brent Culbertson. I'm with the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation. I'm the special agent in charge of technical services, and I serve in our Fusion Center, which is a multiple disciplinary approach to intelligence gathering for our state. We all come together to share good active intelligence. And then I'm also attached to the Center for Safer Schools as a law enforcement partner there.
Thank you, Brent. I'll move on with Sarah Fuhrman.
Good morning, I'm Sarah Fuhrman. I am the Associate Director and a Case Manager with NC State's Violence Prevention and Threat Management Program. I'm also a part of our behavioral assessment team, which is the university's essentially the behavioral assessment, threat management team. I've been, my background is solely in social work. I've been just kind of working in the areas related to violence and crisis response for over 15 years. I've been with the university for going on about 2.5 years now. Prior to this, I worked in a law enforcement agency as a crisis counselor and in child protective services. So I think all of that is just kind of, again, working in the areas of violence and violence prevention and safety. And so I think that this is a really good conversation for all of us to have today, because, you know, I think my belief is that safety is everybody's responsibility. And so becoming more aware of you know, what resources and options and strategies to help with safety is important.
And I would like to note for my students in attendance that Sarah Fuhrman is a licensed clinical social worker. So I want to make sure that you guys hear a lot of what she is saying as it's relevant to this topic and the work that she does. So next we'll move on to Murray Gibson.
Hello, everybody. My name is Murray Gibson, and I'm one of the crime prevention officers here at NC State University. Been in law enforcement since 1999. Basically with our crime prevention unit, we provide basic safety training programs and informational programs for students, faculty, and staff.
Okay, thank you, Murray. And moving on to Carl D'Agostino.
Hello, everyone. My name is Carl D'Agostino with the University Police Department. Been here for about 2 years. Prior to that, I was with the New York City Police Department. So I think this is a great conversation to have, because I've seen both sides from a large city to a large university like this, and the important roles that the crime prevention unit that I'm a part of plays. We're some of the first lines that our new students have, along with our new employees, to what you know, weapons allowed on campus, and those questions that they have if they are concealed carry holders when it does pertain to firearms and campus. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Carl. And last but certainly not least, Mike Anderson.
Good morning, everyone. Mike Anderson. I work with the Department of Public Instruction, where I oversee the Say Something Anonymous reporting system that's put out by Sandy Hook. I'm retired law enforcement, 23 and a half years, 10 and a half years spent as an SRO, both at the middle school and high school level. I've been working with gun violence prevention for a while. I was actually the chair back in 1998 of the North Carolinians Against Gun Violence. So I'm glad to be here. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you, Mike. And I do want to just let you guys know that as we go through some of the questions prior to the question and answer period, not all of our panelists will be in the position to answer some of the questions. Some of the questions may pertain just to campus safety. Others may speak to that safety in the community. So not all of our speakers will be able to touch on all of those topics. We want everyone to stay in the area of their interest and expertise and that in which they work. So with that being said, we'll move on to our question number 1. And this is open to all of our panelists to chime in as you wish. How prevalent is gun violence in the United States and or North Carolina, in your opinion? Not everyone at once.
Well, I think traditionally, and I don't know the latest statistics, but traditionally, gun violence deaths are not even in the top 10 of the leading causes of death. I think that through social media and media in general, we sometimes get a skewed vision of what's actually going on around us, and certainly it's not to make light of that as an issue. It's certainly a very serious issue for us, and something that I think we can make some headway with, but I think traditionally it is not in the very top of the leading causes of death in the country.
Thank you, Murray.
I would say too, when you're looking at gun violence, I think there's different categories that you can take into consideration, right? You're talking about homicides, suicides, accidental shootings, self-defense, officer-involved shootings, a variety of different things. I think there's different statistics for that. I think, the latest that I saw within North Carolina are that in nearly every, I think 2 in every 3 firearm related deaths are suicides. And so I think you're having to kind of take into account of a variety of different things as well when it comes to prevalence.
Any other thoughts on that? And I think that's a really good segue into our next question, which is, in your opinion, what has influenced a 31% increase in gun deaths from 2019 to 2020 in North Carolina? And I will add on to that, I know that in my classes, we talk a lot about mental health, and there is, as Murray said, a lot of social media conversation around mental health and gun violence. And some people do draw a connection between those two. So if you don't mind, speak to what your opinion is on that increase.
Hey everyone, Officer D'Agostino. What I would say, I think, just from what I've seen working at this department and just nationally, I think I'd be remiss not to talk about COVID last year and how that affected and weighed on people. And I think just with, with the overall pandemic and the weights of losing jobs and losing family members, that mental health factor definitely jumped up the rate of gun violence, whether it be from, leading to mass shootings or leading to self-inflicted gunshot wounds. So the mental health aspect definitely played a larger part in that, caused by COVID in that time frame, the tail end of 2019 all through 2020. So I believe that, in my opinion, that's what caused a great deal of the percentages to rise in that time frame.
Yeah, some of the, the factors that I've come across in just kind of research and speculation and theories, and I agree, I think that there is certainly just some heightened things within this pandemic time. A variety of things I've seen are, increasing in gun sales, increased stressors as it relates to the pandemic. We've got an exacerbation of existing health, employment, housing, and financial inequities. There's changes in police practices, other things with the pandemic. I mean, if you think about our youth, and there is kind of a disproportionate, number as it relates to, youth and gun violence. During the pandemic, there's lack of structure and routine, supervision programs that were once open aren't able to be operating or certainly not in the ways that they once were able to do. I think, we've also been dealing with extreme uncertainties over the year with even more than the pandemic. We had this political climate that was highly divisive, some civil unrest, and that can create a lot of fear and anxiety and people really feeling on edge and trying to find ways to, kind of protect or feel more in control and address their safety concerns. What I would say as it relates to mental health and just violence in general are, we've got to be careful around the stigma or having the stigma out there that mentally ill people are violent people. Well, that's not the case. Not all people who are violent have a mental illness, and not all people with mental illness are violent people. In fact, oftentimes individuals that have a mental illness are oftentimes victims of violence, related to certain vulnerabilities that may be there. So, I think regardless of what my opinion is in this, I think that, we know that the numbers are concerning in light of this, being a completely preventable, concern as well. So.
Yeah, I would just dovetail off of what you just said, Sarah. I think it's an excellent point. I have two daughters, one in high school and also one in at UNC Charlotte. And it's astounding to me how they digest their information, how they get their news, how they ingest what they believe to be credible. And in this time where there's limited movement away from either where you live or where you work, or your environments seem to be so limited, that they draw these polarizing, doesn't matter where you sit on the political spectrum or what your belief system is, they draw these conclusions based on the information that they get that's incredibly inaccurate at times. And so I think that really has a heavy weight that it carries on, things are either really, really good or really, really terrible and nowhere in between. And I think that's tough on mental wellness to go from pole to pole like that.
I'll also add, because I know Michelle knows that I like to stir it up a little bit, but I like to add that I think as a society, we have become numb to gun violence. It is an everyday thing. My son who's at App State, both my kids are at App, but he was here with me yesterday and was walking through the house. His Twitter went off and he goes, "Oh, look, another shooting," and just kept on scrolling, right? We've become numb to it. And when we do that, we're letting ourselves down. So, and I would like to kind of cite a case where this is kind of prevalent in the media. They love to hang what I call a moniker on shootings to be able to better explain them away. For example, the one in Vegas, the media immediately started getting on, while the bullets were still coming, the media got online and was trying to basically explain it away. Oh, this person's mentally ill. Well, obviously we knew that. You go shoot a bunch of people, there may be a mental issue there. But they were trying to hang it on there. And there's actually one report that went on there and said, we're trying to find out if this shooter has been bullied. Right. And so they're trying to explain it away. And that's, we have to get away from that and get to the root cause of it. But, as a society, I think that we're becoming numb to it, which is not good.
And I think what I'm hearing all of our panelists say is that there's so many facets and components to gun violence and violence in general that are ever changing. You know, the trends that existed yesterday are not there today, won't be there tomorrow. And if we don't have a holistic approach from prevention, intervention to safety protocols and things in place, then we're always trying to catch our tail, if you will. So I think that's something very important for those who are participating today to understand, as it's relevant to you and the things that you're going to do in your career, is how do you take all those things and digest it and make sure you're doing your part. Let's move on to our question number 3, and this is going to be likely answered by those of you who are connected to our campus. What are some of the policies and procedures that are currently in place at NC State to prevent and protect against gun violence on campus?
I can start out with that. I mean, one thing that we certainly have is our campus workplace violence prevention and management regulation. And so that's NC State Regulation 04.05.02. This regulation was first developed in 2008 and revised in 2017. It defines what violent behavior is. It talks about reporting responsibilities for employees and students, and per the regulation, all students and employees have the responsibility to immediately report any violent behavior or threats of violence. And you can report that, you know, students can report that to the Office of Student Conduct, to our office, to university police. The regulation also talks about training requirements, information on our behavioral assessment team, which, as I mentioned earlier, and I think that this would kind of speak to, you know, what procedures are kind of put in place. The behavioral assessment team is our university's threat assessment threat management team. It's coordinated by our office. And the team, it's a multidisciplinary team that comes together to analyze potentially threatening situations. We also work together to develop, implement, or advise administrators of recommendations that might help address the concerns. Trying to think of some other things that the regulation kind of hits. It does talk also about possible consequences of regulating the violation or violating the regulation. And yeah, so we have that in place. I know that there's some others that I'm sure police could speak to. We have our regulation that addresses firearms and some other things. So I'll stop there and let maybe police talk about some of their.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. So some of the things that we do on our end over here that we're responsible, Officer Gibson and myself are responsible for in the crime prevention unit is, so the 2 private residences that we currently have on campus, both the Greens apartments and North Shore condos, when anybody leases anything private on college property that we are responsible for in our jurisdiction, they receive paperwork that says if they do have a firearm, there's things that they're supposed to follow and bring to our attention. And a great portion of them do. Even our students on campus that are concealed carry holders, we get calls and emails almost on a daily basis, people asking us what are the rules and regulations, where they can carry, where they cannot carry, how they're safely to house their firearm if it's in their vehicle. And Officer Gibson and myself, we do our new student orientations and our new employee orientations, and we give out all that information for the weapons on campus. This university does a great job at reporting stuff. As a department, we get a lot of calls about people exhibiting, signs of concerning behavior or just things that don't feel right to them. So we have a very in-tune community. I just wanted to put that out there that we do get a lot of proactive responses to the things that do happen on campus, and we do find out a lot of that through them. But the firearm side of it, just wanted people to be aware that we're inundated with calls and emails about responsible gun owners that are trying to find out the best way to protect themselves and other people by securing their firearms while on campus. So.
And another thing that we do have on campus here, which is an amazing tool, really, that most municipalities don't have, but it's our wolf alert system. That is an absolutely amazing tool to have. Hoping that we never have to use it for this, that will absolutely save lives in the event of something like this happening. So the Wolf Alert system is just an amazing piece of technology that hopefully we never have to use it, but in case something does happen, that's an excellent tool.
Thank you, Carl and Murray. I would like to shape this question a little differently and allow Mike and Brent to chime in. I know many of you that are students that are graduating are going to be working in our communities and working with school-age children. And I would like for Mike and Brent to speak a little bit about the protections that are currently in place in some of our school settings and programs that exist that you can speak on that are allowing dialogue to happen around this issue and also put some protective measures in place.
Yeah, I think this might be a good time for Mike to talk about the app. He directs that. It's a fantastic tool. And then maybe I can add something to that.
Yeah, a couple years, I want to say it was last year, but last year really didn't count. In 2019, DPI went on and signed a contract with the Say Something Anonymous reporting system, which the vendor is the Sandy Hook Promise, and we all know what happened up at Sandy Hook Elementary. And so we have signed on with them, and we are currently live with their anonymous reporting system, which is monitored 24/7, 365 days a year in a crisis center that's located down in Miami. Kids throughout the state. I think we have 400 and I'm terrible with numbers. 431,000 kids trained so far in the state. I think we're right at 89 traditional school districts, and then about 157 different charters, which this application is live in. It's totally anonymous, and it's a great tool because it gives the quiet kids a tool to be able to voice their concerns about school safety, and it also gives parents, it gives the high school kids, the athletes, all everybody in and around that school system, the ability to anonymously report school safety issues, as well as suicide ideations, as well as cyberbullying and bullying, as it comes to be. So it's really, I think I'm trying to go off the top of my head. I think we have right at 845 different life-saving tips that have come through, either by suicide ideation, cutting, self-harm, all the way down to self-reporting of, Carl said it a minute ago about just feeling kind of separated and depressed and during the pandemic. So it's really given a voice to all of the students. But what we wanted to do as well with this is not just create a safe environment for the kids, but also create a safe environment for the teachers to go to work every day. I think that we forget about that a lot. But to kick it over to Brent, it's really helped these schools kind of focus in on that, on a threat assessment piece, which Brent is in charge of.
Yeah. So Sarah, what you were talking about, on your campus is behavioral assessment, and right now we're at the infancy stages of being able to roll out a program that would be more on a statewide level to promote best practices for these school threat assessment teams. And maybe it's just being completely 100% vulnerable. Maybe it's not completely apropos to call it school threat assessment, because we're not just assessing the threat levels or risk levels, we're assessing behaviors, right? So we're the beautiful thing about that, and I'd love to hear more about what you guys do as we move forward. Beautiful thing is you're trying to proof a negative, right? So what you're trying to begin to, the end goal is that you would have very limited, optimally none, but very limited school behavioral incidents, because the behavioral team is catching some of those behaviors, and they're addressing and minimizing those students who have those ideations or begin to make those kind of plans. Will get them the help that they need, truly, not a theory, but in practicality, we begin to mitigate some of those circumstances by literally walking through life with these students and helping them cope with different behaviors. So guess for me, the exciting part is for that number, for the gun violence related issues to go down, and nobody really be able to put their finger on why, but that these behavioral units would know exactly why, because they're beginning to mitigate these behaviors way before an event would occur. And we're not sweeping anything under the rug. We're just casting a light on a behavior that we believe that we can begin to amend and get those students again that help that they need to get off that violent pathway or that potential violent pathway. So it's really exciting to hear that, Sarah, that you guys are already doing this, have been doing this, and our hope is that we can deliver this out to help elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools do the exact same thing, so that when they come to your campus, you get more of a clearer picture of, they've learned how to adapt in elementary school, because we've seen that these problems don't arise in middle school and high school. They become prevalent even in as early as elementary school. So I say all that to say, we don't know what we don't know yet, but we're excited about the possibility of rolling out best practices in these school environments.
Yeah, so I wanted to just to take a minute, if I can, just kind of talk a little bit more about our procedures. And I think that Brent articulated exactly what we do, what our goals are beautifully. Our work is really in efforts to, one, work towards the safety of our campus community, but also towards these, helping all students, staff, faculty, individuals that are affiliated with our campus be at their most successful during their time with the university. And, what we recognize are that there are things that can put somebody on that pathway to violence. And so are there areas that we can provide recommendations, resources, and supports that'll help kind of get them off that pathway, that can help mitigate risk factors. Our office, certainly, yes, we work in partnership with many other partners on campus, and I can go into that as well. But certainly, I think the big, thing that oftentimes people are thinking about are those mass, events, those mass shooting events and stuff. But, we're looking at all areas of violence, because we know that violence can really impact, all areas of our lives, and it can impact the successes of our students and employees. So, many people may be familiar with the concerning behavior referrals. Oftentimes people will submit those, and what happens is those referrals can either get assigned for CARES follow-up or for follow-up from a member of a behavioral assessment team. Usually it's somebody from our office, one of us as case managers. What I'll do is I'll put it here in just a minute. I'll put some information in the chat box if I'm able to, that'll give some links to more information about referrals to Wolf Alert, University Police, all that kind of stuff, so that people have that at their access. But so, once we receive a referral, we determine if it's more appropriate for the CARES follow-up, which is generally a case manager from the CARES program would follow up, and it involves a student and concerns related to just kind of students in crisis or distress, experiencing some stressors, whether it's academic stressors, medical events, mental health, other personal stressors that don't quite rise to the risk or concern of a violent standpoint. If it does rise to that level, then one of our case managers will manage that and take a look at that. And generally what happens after that is, we may follow up with the person who made the referral just to gather more information. I want to go back to the behavioral assessment team. So like I mentioned, we focus on concerns that involve some aspect of risk for violence or threats of violence. We also work with not just students, but also staff and faculty and a non-affiliated individual. Those are the concerns that come to us. So a non-affiliated person would be somebody that's not directly tied to the university. It could be a former student or employee. It could be, maybe there's concerns related to domestic violence and it's a partner that's not affiliated with the university. So we take a look at all of those and do kind of assessment on all of those. What happens next kind of depends on, the urgency involved, other information that's been known or that's collected about a person of concern. Sometimes it can involve one of us meeting with that person. It can involve, a welfare check if needed by police. It could involve, other ways of kind of addressing and mitigating the risk factors. Like I said, the behavioral assessment team is a multidisciplinary team. So we have a representative from university police, the counseling center, prevention services, academic affairs, housing, the Office of Institutional Equity and Diversity, the Office of General Counsel. So we have somebody that sits on our team just to kind of make sure we're doing what we're supposed to be doing and addressing any kind of legal concerns that may come up. And the Office of Student Conduct. So that's who sits on our student behavioral assessment team. And I think it's important to note that a referral does not mean that somebody is going to get in trouble. Our process is not disciplinary in nature. It's really designed to provide early intervention and address those, concerns so that we can help work towards the successes of all people involved and, work towards the safety of our campus community. So I think that's all I wanted to mention. There may be questions about that later.
Thank you, Sarah. And I think that's something that so many of our participants wanted to hear flow nicely together. I think many of them have heard those acronyms or those words, but didn't know exactly how those fit together. And that, in fact, you all have the opportunity to make referrals or, just call Sarah's office and say, I'm not real sure what I should do. Can I have some guidance, please? And those are things that we hear exist, but until Sarah really kind of laid that out, I'm not sure everyone completely understood how fluid and organized that those programs and opportunities were. Sarah's an overachiever, so she hit on my next question. So we're gonna ask it, and you're gonna keep in mind some of the things that Sarah mentioned just then. What are some steps that NC State students, faculty, and staff can take to ensure that they are prepared in the event of a gun-related incident on campus and also in the community? So that's twofold, and please feel free to speak in your purview.
I think one of the greatest things that can help is removing the phone from in front of your face. I say that jokingly, but I mean, we see it a lot on campus. I mean, just put the phone down or the technology or the computer and just pay attention to your surroundings. I mean, gun violence, cars, anything like that. I mean, coming from New York, I've seen people be oblivious to things that are happening 10 feet away. And to a degree, it happens over here on this campus also. But what I would also say is get with your departments and seek out training to help, if not a great deal of use, yourself individually. We offer trainings on active shooter awareness and general safety and self-defense. I mean, add those things to your personal resume that you can, when an incident does happen, you can revert back to that training, that even if you've only experienced it maybe once or twice, us in law enforcement, when we experience a traumatic event, we revert to the last training that we've had. And fine motor skills are out the window at that point, and gross motor skills kick in. And just having those layers, you know, like an onion, having those layers that are just going to be in place to help you when any sort of critical incident does come around, will definitely benefit you greatly.
Carl, can you speak to where we might find those training opportunities if someone's interested in attending?
Yeah, absolutely. So number one, I'll put it in the chat. You could send an email to crime prevention, one word, at ncsu.edu, and it'll go to the crime prevention unit. We're responsible for dealing with all those trainings, and you'll get to see Officer Gibson and myself again. And then also, if you wanted to see what else the department offers as a whole, you could visit our website. You can just type in Google NCSU Police, or you can do ncsu.edu/police. And we're also on social media. We advertise when pre-COVID, when training is in full effect. We just finished our Citizens Police Academy, and we had great feedback from that. That was actually in person. We followed all COVID regulations, but we're continually putting events on our calendar for people that want self-defense, active shooter training, self-defense training. If you have pepper spray, if that's something you choose to carry for personal protection on campus, we could teach you how to use that. So you have some sort of training to go with the tools that you want to protect yourself or others with.
One of the things that we actually go over in our active shooter program is the idea that everywhere you go, whether it's on campus or off campus, everywhere you go, you want to build an awareness. And there's actually a little game you can kind of play with yourself, and that is, every time you walk into a building, do you know where all the exits are? Start playing a mental game with yourself and look for exits. Also look for things that you could possibly use as improvised weapons. Some of us carry weapons on a daily basis, some of us don't, but usually there are things around that could possibly be used as a weapon. Something as simple as a fire extinguisher in a building can be used. So you can start to rehearse through your daily life and basically become more prepared by doing that. And that's one of the things that we do go over in our safety programs.
And I'd like to add to Murray's statements there. I think we need to acknowledge those things and allow those thoughts to come up. When we are face-to-face in my courses, the very first day, students generally arrive and they're thinking, we're going to go over the syllabus, we're going to hear what this class is about. And we start talking about exits, and we start talking about us being on the second floor of a building, and what if we hear something? And just the faces of the students, they tell me this is not something they've thought about. And so even if we're not developing a plan that day, we're starting that conversation and making that something that is in their everyday situational awareness. So I love just having the thought be there. It was absent before, but just thinking about how you would remove yourself from a situation. So thank you, Murray, for bringing that up. Mike or Brent, would you like to speak to this question?
I'm so glad that Carl said to get the phone up from in front of your face, because that's, I think if you've seen, I mean, look, and I always refer back to that Vegas shooting, because it had so many aspects to it. But I mean, there's people on there that were actively getting shot at or had been shot that were on Facebook Live, or that were recording it or whatever. And it was amazing to me that the self-preservation didn't kick in with them, right? I mean, I've been in several firefights before in life-threatening situations, and I can tell you that this box right here did not save my life. You know, putting my head on a swivel, knowing my exits. Going to movie theaters, which I very rarely do now because of the way they're set up. But just having that situational awareness and like Officer Gibson said, playing that what if game. I've been out of service now for 7 years, and it still drives my family nuts because I walk in and I'm looking around. I don't put my back to the door. I want to see everybody's hands. Me at Disney World is probably not a good idea because it's just so much going on, but it's having that situational awareness, not to the point of paranoia, right? And not to the point where you are just absolutely miserable when you're going out and about in society. But it's having that self-awareness of what if, because it's happening more and more, unfortunately. I think we've had, what, 3 or 4 mass shootings here in the past 48, 72 hours. You know, and you just really can't let your guard down. The idea of having improvised weapons, there's conventional and unconventional weapons. And like when I do school safety training, I tell teachers all the time, you know, I actually had a teacher in one of my classes say, I said, you know, if a shooter gets into your room and gets into your space, you can't call timeout. You've got to do something. You know, and it's, you know, hit them with a chair, hit them with a computer monitor, get those big choo-choo pencils that, you know, elementary school kids have, and, get some pokes in with that. I mean, you got to be able to do something. And I actually had a teacher raise her hand in the back of the room at one time and say, what if I get in trouble by hitting them with a chair? Right. And so that's kind of the mentality of, you know, they're not there for a tickle fight. They're not there to, they're not there to play nice, obviously. And so you don't have to play nice either. So I really appreciate, the officers of their NC State, you're saying, get that phone out and getting that. And then they get good situational awareness under control.
And I would like to bring up for our participants who are predominantly social workers and will be going into the field very soon, that although 4 of the 5 panelists in front of you are law enforcement, with Sarah being a licensed clinical social worker, you have heard me say the word situational awareness before. This doesn't just apply to law enforcement. When you're doing home visits, when you are in an environment, your head has to be on a swivel, as Mike mentioned. You have to know that the things that are in your area, the things that could be a safety hazard to you or those that you're serving. So as you're hearing these words, I don't want you to dismiss them because it's law enforcement that's speaking to you. I want you to hear the words that actually have a lot to do with what function you're going to be serving in our environment as social workers. I also want to bring up bystander fear. And I think something that Sarah and Murray said earlier made me think about that. We live in this context where we don't want to see things happening, and we don't want to have to report things that are happening. We don't want to go to trial and all these big things that we have in our heads. A lot of the anonymous reporting that Mike talked about this in our communities, in our schools, also applies to the things that are on campus, the programs that Sarah mentioned. So you don't have to intervene if you don't feel comfortable and you don't feel safe in that moment, but do know that there are ways and methods that you can report anonymously, and you can curb some of that bystander fear. And also, I know so many people are afraid of bystander intimidation, being, bullied in some way or form because you saw something and you did say something, but there are alternative methods to that. So also keep that in mind. We're going to move on with another question. We have about 10 more minutes before we'll move into question and answers from our participants. In your professional opinions, what more can be done, if anything, by NC State to further gun-related violence on campus and to further those things that could prevent gun violence in our community?
Well, I guess I'd like to just kind of start out with the idea that good security is both expensive and incredibly inconvenient. I think we have to start out with the idea, in terms of security, we have to start out with the idea that we need to resolve within ourselves, what we are willing to do to improve security. NC State is an open campus, which means that we're extremely vulnerable. And so we really have to have that discussion about what we're willing to do, and, then go from there in terms of the security aspects on campus.
I would like to see NC State have more connections with their students, and more intervals of just checking in to see how newer students are doing. I've heard people on patrol, students, and my time back here in crime prevention, just say that they didn't have anybody to talk to, or they did something because they weren't sure what to do. So just that guiding light that the community, the college community overall, can really just have monthly, weekly check-ins with the newer students. A lot of newer students become victims um, to things. International students also become victims of crimes that we might take for granted, but these things are prevalent in our campus community. So just more check-ins would be great. More open forums, more discussions like this, more boots on the ground interactions with people, and just trying to generally gauge how people are doing, not waiting for it to be instances of behavior that is concerning or suspicious and that gets reported possibly on a whim, but where you have that background of this is what this person's been doing, this is linear progression, or this is downward spiraling, that we can kind of pinpoint to interject before it becomes issues that do lead to critical instances, or at worst possible loss of life.
Yeah, I would just add to all of that. I mean, I think those are all great things, and again, I think, and I know that our department is making more outreach efforts just to provide some awareness and some information as relates to concerning behaviors and resources and referrals and what happens after, because we want people to feel comfortable in referring. What we know is that people don't just snap, and after incident reviews and research has shown that with targeted violence, that there have been some flashing red or yellow lights or some warning behaviors. Very frequently these acts are preceded by what we call leakage behaviors, where an individual may post something on social media or has said something, somebody has observed a concern beforehand. And so again, that's why we say, that safety is everybody's responsibility, and it's important to report early, and it's important to report often, and because we can't assess a situation if we don't know about it. And you're likely to have that information way before it gets to us. And so we certainly would, encourage continued, referring so that people can get connected to those supports and resources.
And I don't, this isn't really related to what we can do at NC State, but somebody was mentioning earlier, I think Brent, it might have been you, but talking about how early we will sometimes see signs of issues. And, I think we're all aware that there's not nearly enough money in the mental health field across the country. This isn't something that's just based here in North Carolina, but I think we really do need to pay more attention to how we can start at an earlier point. Something as simple as just conflict resolution, teaching children how to resolve their conflicts without physical means and things like that. So I think inevitably that's one of the discussions that we do need to have down the road, not necessarily about NC State, but we would essentially reap the benefits of that if that were done.
Would anybody else like to chime in on that one?
I would just, on a typical day, and I'm not holding anybody to these specific numbers, but how many people are walking around campus, Michelle? How in the thousands?
Well, of course, that's changed quite a bit. And that was also some of my thinking as well, Brent, is, we're anticipating coming back onto campus in a more normal fashion, face-to-face in fall. And so one of the things I was thinking is, how are we preparing for that return of students? And a lot of these students haven't seen their cohort members or faculty in some time. It could be increasingly difficult to look at patterns of behavior and how those have changed, or it could be very easy. So I anticipate Sarah's office and Marie and Carl might be substantially more busy as we move into that fall semester, only because I feel like there's this heightened awareness. I don't have numbers of how many people are traveling on our campus. I don't even know, Brent, if I could wrap my head around that number on a normal, pre-COVID day. Anthony, do you have any numbers? Carl?
At last pre-COVID, with everything up and running with the private businesses that do lease out the spaces on campus, it's upwards to 60,000 people. That's a full pre-COVID semester, or just a regular Tuesday. It's almost 60,000 people on any part of this campus combined, that NC State leases or owns. The number fluctuates a little bit here and there, but we have wildlife, we have USDA, we have LexisNexis, just to name a few. I mean, there's those large corporations on campus, along with the student body, faculty, staff. There's 58. I know there's 58 sworn law enforcement officers. That's that's a large discrepancy in numbers. So yeah, about 60,000 is the good ballpark.
Yeah, I guess that was my point is let's just say it's 50,000. Let's just take on a conservative pre-COVID day, it's 50,000 and you've got 20, 25 officers on a shift. I think for students, it would be, it's helpful for me to put it in terms of when you go to the movie theater and you pay, I don't know what movies cost anymore. I don't go either, but let's just say it's $10 for a movie ticket. And you pay your $10 and you go in and watch the movie, and you never take into consideration that there were thousands of jobs that have to take place for that movie to be produced, and it at times will cost $100 to $120 million to produce that. And so it is with school safety. If you see yourself as a consumer and not as an aid, or having some capacity to help in keeping your school safe, you just simply follow into that consumer mentality that 20 to 25 officers are going to keep 50,000 people safe, and it's just not realistic. I tell my daughters all the time that it's their responsibility to keep themselves safe. And if there's a crisis, then yes, let's reach out, but let's do our part. And I don't really know completely what that's going to look like, Michelle, coming back into this environment. But I do. It does seem to me that students may initially be less resilient than they were before, because everything is so much easier. It's at your fingertips. You can view it on a screen. So to me, I guess I wrap all this into that last question. What more can you do is don't think about being a consumer, but think about being an advocate for law enforcement, to be a partner that would be able to assist in increasing the safety of your school system, of wherever you're at, whatever environment you're in. And I think that's what success looks like from our end, because just being vulnerable, law enforcement, it has been a tough transition for us to stop thinking about the criminal justice system and start thinking about wellness, right? So with our behavioral threat assessment unit that we have at the SBI, we've worked over 120 cases in behavioral mitigation. Not one of those cases has ever been introduced into the judicial system. So law enforcement is becoming more about helping people get off the pathway. I think now is a critical time for the public to begin understanding how they can partner with law enforcement. So if we're meeting you in the middle, then maybe that's more of what that looks like, right?
Yeah. And I know that since we do have students and faculty participating in today's forum, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up that if a incident did happen on campus, you heard Carl talk about the ratio of the population versus the campus police department. There is mutual aid that exists. Other departments would be coming in to help. So I didn't want anybody to walk away saying, oh my, we have 60,000 people on campus in this tiny department. They do have mutual aid, and I don't want want to speak to who they partner with, but there's other agencies that would come to help. You wouldn't be there scrambling
Yes.
with a small amount of law enforcement.
Yes, thank you, Michelle. Yes, we do have a large amount of that number would be 10 times that in just a few minutes with the number of partnerships that we do have and the resources that Wake County does have available. Um, yeah, in a critical incident, there will be plenty of help available, both law enforcement and medical assistance, emergency services as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, guys. So we're going to wrap up our questions from my moderation, and I'm going to allow questions and answers from those of you that are participating. I think we can do that in one of two ways. Correct me if I'm wrong, Anthony. Are we allowing chat and also verbal questions, or how best should we proceed?
Yeah, we can do both. So if we're going to open up now for the question and answer, I think what we'll do is you can unmute your mic to ask the question, or you can put it in the chat and we will monitor the chat to be able to ask the question. So either way is fine.
I see Fatima has a question.
Hi, everyone.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm a student here at NC State, a second year in the MSW program. I was also an undergraduate student at NC State from 2012 to 2016, so really close to the Raleigh community. I appreciate all of you all coming here and giving us a lot of information. There's definitely a lot that helped me understand, the systems that are working to keep us secure. Carl, if I may call you Carl, or Officer D'Agostino, I really appreciated your. Yeah, I really appreciated your point about the fact that it's important. I would say, as a student and a person of color, there seems to be a lot that can be done in addition to these really intricate systems that have been built to keep us safe. And what I would say, the area that I feel is a gap as a student, and like I said, as a person of color, is cultural response. And Carl, I really appreciated your point about coming into the community and checking in on them rather than, from a broad perspective. We learn this in social work. We can't declare for the community what they need. We need to go in and ask what they need. So I would say, if I could say just from my perspective, and then I'll get to my question. One thing we didn't talk about is the fact that violence is caused also by a culture that excuses unconscious bias and a culture that sometimes dismisses the many events that have been revealed to us. I would actually say I'm grateful have been revealed to me through social media of violence from, unfortunately, law enforcement and legal systems towards people of color, specifically Black men and women. And so it's really concerning that we didn't get to talk about that today. And I want to hear from you all, how are BIPOC populations being protected by these legal systems, and what equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives are allowing these populations to be especially protected? Because as a person of color, I really do feel the fact of the matter is I don't feel safe when it comes to gun violence. And I do the surveying, and I've taken self-protective classes, and at the same time, the news and the events, the fact of the matter is these events are happening. 3 people a day in the last year since George Floyd were killed by some sort of law enforcement staff member. And so the facts are there, the numbers are there, and mostly BIPOC individuals have been targeted by these killings, unfortunately, and these losses of life. And so how are these people being kept safe? How is there a culture that is being built that acknowledges those inequities and trains staff so that they are also acting in consciousness of BIPOC populations?
So it's a lot to unpack, and I appreciate your question. Thank you for that. One of the ways I could say that NC State, as a police department, as we handle, we don't care who's making the call. We don't care about the information that's perceived to us or how it's perceived. We dispatch that call however we receive it. We follow the same guidelines. If it's a report is needed, we will enter it as a report. If arrest is needed to be made, we'll make an arrest. We do a lot of education. That's our stance as a police department, is a lot of education rather than arresting or summoning people. So when we respond to calls, we always have the forefront in our mind that we want to have a conversation before we even eventually get to putting hands on people. We want to hear both sides of the story, and I think that in my personal opinion, that a lot of people across the country need to get that understanding that when law enforcement receives a call that is dispatched to our communication center, we're going off of the information that that person is telling somebody else. So it's a big game of telephone, and it's a constantly evolving situation. Um, all those pieces that are working before the officer even gets to the call to deal with that person who's in crisis or who is exhibiting any signs of behavior that is concerning to an individual that placed that initial call. Um, so I think there's a lot of opportunity for training and just awareness that could be made to the community in how calls are dispatched and how they're received by police municipalities across the country, um, to maybe what to say or what not to say, um, that is indicative of somebody that is looking to harm or injure people, possibly even that officer responding to the scene. Um, Law enforcement, we continually do training all year long. We do training across the nation to maintain our certification, whether it be use of force training or bias incident training. These things are constantly being making sure that we're following to maintain our certifications as law enforcement officers. And I will say that I like to look at numbers of things, and and I think anybody that is wrongfully killed by any law enforcement across the country, in my opinion, I will always stand against bad officers as a good officer, and a large portion of law enforcement community in this nation stands against bad officers, and we want nothing to do with them like any other profession. But it's the law of large numbers. I mean, there are roughly 800,000 law enforcement officials across the country having millions of interactions with people on a daily basis. Um, Unfortunately, there are some of them that do end poorly for both the officer and the person involved. Um, Officers are killed, unarmed people are killed, innocent bystanders are killed when those interactions do go sideways. But I think that what we need to do is we need to take an approach that kind of brings both sides of the law enforcement side and the community side together. So interaction on how law enforcement, reacts and deals with the police definitely needs to be adjusted or fine-tuned, and the law enforcement side of that through community policing and continued engagement would definitely need to be fine-tuned. So maybe a less heavy-handed approach, more community involved, versus the overall outlook on police from a civilian standpoint. So there's a lot of middle ground that needs to be covered, and both sides of the aisle need to definitely take part in that. Sorry for that long-winded.
Fatima, I do.
I'm sorry.
I just want to take a moment and describe in a little bit more detail something that Carl was mentioning. To maintain your status as a police officer or sheriff's deputy or any other law enforcement position in the state of North Carolina, every year you have to participate successfully in in-service training put forth by the North Carolina Training and Standards. And it's a host of different topics. And what I've noticed over the last couple of years, there's been much more focus on the areas of cultural competence, inclusion, diversity. So I really see that there has been some shaping of the training that's being delivered that maybe was just touched on in the last couple of decades. Probably the late 90s, one of the hottest discussions in that training every year was juvenile minority sensitivity training. And we've seen that stay the same. And now we're reshaping some of the other things that we really need officers to hear. So that's been a really pleasant edit and update that I've been able to see happen so that they have the opportunity to have this training. Dr. Bullitt?
Yes, thank you for your question, Fatima, and thank you, Officer D'Agostino, for your response. I think that we in the School of Social Work are doing our part in terms of partnering with police forces, police departments. We've had student interns at campus police. That's how I refer to them, just as campus police. We've had interns there. We have interns at Raleigh PD. We've long had interns there. We have a great partnership with a number of the police departments across the state. So I think we as social workers are engaged in these partnerships in order to combat some of what we're seeing so we can work together in our communities. But also there's the, I may get it wrong, Citizens Police Academy. And I've completed the Citizens Police Academy, and it's open to anyone, students, faculty, staff. So if you really want to get a better sense of, why is it that officers respond in the way they do and why they, I would encourage you to enroll in, participate in, and complete the Citizens Police Academy. It's very informative. And it, I think as a citizen, enables us to have more information when we do engage with officers about why it is we're seeing what we see.
And it's not just the campus police department that hosts those. I know Fatima, for example, is graduating. Most jurisdictions are hosting these Citizens Police Academies. So if it's not with campus, look into the municipality, the sheriff's office in your area, and participate in theirs. I think it's invaluable. I remember Dr. Bullock having such a wonderful experience when she went through the academy. And I
think shocking would be a better word. No, I'm just kidding.
I was not to say that. I wasn't going to say that. I encourage everyone to participate and really understand how they are dispatched and how they respond and why.
And
The
one thing
reason
I'd
I
like
say
to
shocking, I couldn't do that work. I just want to say I couldn't do the work. I couldn't go put myself on the front lines and do what officers do. So I said shocking because when you participate, you sort of become like an officer and do some of those things. So, just that, I just want to clarify why I said shocking. It was a great experience. I learned a lot.
I would like to quickly add, we had one of our participants in the last academy that just graduated. When we did our car stop workshop, she was a little dismissive in the first part of the academy, very respectful, but dismissive of what we do as law enforcement. And when we did our car stop workshop, um, she it was an eye opener for her. She had a experience when she was doing the car stop because we have mock car stops that we do, and it was a controlled environment. And she came up to us and made it known to us that even though it was a controlled environment and that she was not in any way going to be injured, it was one of the most terrifying things that she had ever done. She did not know what we were going to do, how the person in the vehicle was going to react. And now officers are doing that every single day throughout the day, 365 days a year. In the rain, in the snow, at night, darkly lit, brightly lit. I mean, you don't know who you're stopping. And like I said, 99.9% of those car stops go off. I don't want to use the word routine, but go off without a hitch. And there's that one time where things do escalate, and something does happen that is regrettable by both the officer and the person involved. But that number is so low, but there is a reason why we do what we do. And feel free to join us for the next academy. Wake County, actually, we are in working relationship with Wake County Sheriff's Department. They're looking to start one of their citizens police academies. And actually, we had a couple of meetings with them to see about how we can implement that. They were asking us for advice because they really like the community part of it that we can bring coming from a campus. So it's not that municipality and dealing with criminals every single day. It's crisis, intervention. It's all of those other verbal judo things that we can bring as a campus police department. And a lot of us here at campus police have done other municipalities and come to, we've kind of had to revamp our style of policing for the better, to be, to be more conducive of a campus environment with a lot of different people. Again, a lot of foreign entities that are on campus that really don't have the same policing styles around the world that the United States does. Um, we've had, Officer Gibson and myself have had plenty of people from foreign students who have come in and say that they just don't have trust, or they don't really trust their law enforcement officials. And, our interactions with them have kind of, changed that way of thinking slightly. And it's a continued work in progress.
I want to say one more thing that I'll go on mute, I promise. Mine was the simulation of the domestic violence, and it literally almost brought me to tears. We were the officers responding to a domestic violence experience, and it was like nothing I've ever experienced before. So I'll go on mute now.
So we have about 15 more minutes. We have plenty of time to take additional questions if you have them. Kendall, I see that your hand is raised.
I had to say something.
Of course.
So first, thank you for your service, all of you. Next, so another population that doesn't get a lot of light because people just are unfamiliar are the people with disabilities. So I know it sounds simple to go in a room and like look around and find your exits and, make a plan. So I'm blind, and, that method just doesn't work for me. So I'm just curious to know like what you recommend, because I feel like I have so much more anxiety and paranoia not knowing my surroundings every day. I do have a dog, and she would find the door in a heartbeat if I asked her to, but I feel like we're the weak link when it comes to, being amongst a group of 100 people and not knowing what's going on. So there's been a lot of discussion in the blind community, especially recently, of, what we can do to protect ourselves. And then, if your dog were to get shot, you still have to carry your dog with you, and they are your eyes at this point. So just curious if anybody has any, insight or any recommendations on what to do to keep ourselves safe as well.
Okay, and one of the things that we actually talk about when we hold our active shooter scenario is we talk about physical limitations, and typically I won't go into a lot of detail, but we break it down into 3 options that you have. You can run, you can hide, you can fight. Sometimes you're going to be doing more than one of those things, but again, when we're discussing the possibility of those 3 options, we do have to take our limitations into account, and there are all kinds of limitations that could play into that. But I think the first step is really the fact that you're thinking about it right now. The worst thing you can do is to get into the situation without having actually considered these things. Obviously it is going to limit to some extent what your options are. And some possibilities are just things as simple as partnering with the people in your work area. We always say that having a group is much better than having just being out by yourself. Statistically speaking, you're more likely to be victimized if you're by yourself than if you're with a group. So we always recommend in our general safety programs that you like, for instance, especially at night, walk in a group or walk with a friend, somebody, a coworker. So that might be a good place to start. Again, if you have any specific ideas or questions or anything like that, you can always don't hesitate to reach out to us. I did put in our crime prevention email there, but these are things without knowing your specific situation, where you work or where your classes are, whatever the case may be. It's hard to say exactly what would be best, but you do have some options there. And again, what we try to do is we try to get people to start thinking in terms of, if something were to happen at any given time, what are my best reactions? What are my best options for that? So, I mean, you've definitely already started down that road, which is great, because that's really where it needs to be. The people that are going to be in the worst situation are the ones that have never thought about it before. So I'm glad that you're at least thinking in those terms.
Yes, thank you.
And Kendall is an amazing advocate, and I am certain, although I don't want to speak for Murray and Carl, Kendall, but I am almost 100% sure that they would welcome your feedback and insight as someone who's actively thinking about this and who is limited in some capacity in those kinds of situations. I think that they would really value your input. So
Absolutely,
think about.
yes, we would. So, Kendall, if you wouldn't mind getting up with us offline about that, there's that, that special consideration that you bring to the table that Officer Gibson and myself we're just not familiar with. So we don't want to speak ill about anything that we don't know or we're not familiar with. So if you wouldn't mind getting up with us, your input would be greatly appreciated.
Absolutely.
Other questions? I know there's questions out there. Vanessa. Oh, I think you're still muted, Vanessa. There you go.
Sorry, I got rid of my self view and I couldn't find myself. So my name's Vanessa. I am an academic advisor here at State. Carl, I am also from New York, so that was fun to hear. I came here to get rid of the snow. I don't know if that was your reason for coming here, but that was mine.
Yep, just 31 years in New York.
So I think there's been this kind of interesting dichotomy going on with what we've been talking about. We've talked a lot about anonymous reporting, anonymous resources. Those are great for certain reasons. But then we've also talked about we need better conflict resolution, which I think is in direct contrast with anonymous reporting, because if we're so used to doing things anonymously, we're not going to be able to talk to each other. So I guess there's no specific question, but just kind of thoughts on that, how to bridge the gap between that, anything along those lines.
Well, and I think that also in our society, we are much more unattached from each other. You know, you can even see it with kids, and I've seen kids sitting next to each other, texting each other, obviously because they both start laughing and look at each other, but they're sitting beside each other. They're not actually speaking to each other. And I think this is something that, you know, whether we like it or not, we are more detached from each other. I think that's a bad thing. I think that we're losing some of our ability to communicate on a human level, and I think if you look at some of the if we're just talking about violence in general, which of course gun violence is a subset of, but violence in general, I think is something that is made easier when we lose the ability to think of each other in human ways. And so I think that's a problem. That's why I did say, and I brought up the conflict resolution thing and teaching children how to do this. I think that's amazingly important because we whether we want to be attached in terms of humanity or not, we are. And we in the end we do deal with each other that way. But I think, you know, certainly in my lifetime things have changed a great deal, and I'm hoping that we can maybe kind of tilt things back in the other direction a little bit.
So Vanessa, I would just add that it's not an either or, right? So just because you're addressing a situation from an anonymous position, and then you're talking about conflict resolution and conflict mitigation. So just like you would go to, some people prefer to go to a restaurant and go through the drive-through. Some people like to go inside and sit down and socialize with others. Some people like for DoorDash to bring it to their doorstep. So what we're really trying to do is address multiple ways that people can be a part of the solution. And so if anonymous reporting is something that's very appealing to you, then we want to promote that. Also, if you're in a social setting and you have to deal with a situation, we want to give you the tools for that as well. So And I see what your point is, but I do think that if you think of it from as tools in your tool belt, and then you pull out the one that you need at the time, or the one that most is amenable to the way that you're built, maybe the way that you deal with conflict. I think that's sort of what we're going for there, is to be able to approach different types of people because they respond in different kind of ways and would be motivated by different ways of reporting and being I think most people want to be a part of the solution. It's just that sometimes that part is different for different people.
Yeah, and I think going off of just to add to what Brent said, my take on it is just going back to what we were talking about, the numbers on campus versus the police officers available. If my thought on it has always been that the community in whole is responsible and has the authority, um, you know, to stamp out to evil or wrongdoing, of themselves. I sat in a seminar where there was a thing on about drug dealing on the street corner. Well, I think it's the responsibility of the community to stamp out that problem, not law enforcement. If you don't want drug dealers on that street corner, then it is the responsibility of the citizens to take over that street corner and to take it back. And what I mean by that is that the influence and responsibility that communities have is greater than police departments overall. The ability to change the laws, the ability to change the way courts are ran and things of that nature through legislature and public opinion is so much greater than ours is from a law enforcement perspective. Just the force that citizens have behind their opinions, and I think we saw a lot of that last year. From the good side of a lot of the movements that came out, and the actual proper representation of those movements. We saw that the ability to change is overwhelming, and I think that civilian side of it really needs to be that pushing forefront to eventually change law enforcement overall and just the community standards in certain areas, especially high crime areas.
Professor G, I think we have about 4 more minutes, so we probably have time for maybe one more question.
I think we might have lost her.
Okay, so I'll fill in for that. Is there any more questions? Like I said, we have probably about 4 more minutes until she comes back in. Does anybody have any other questions that they would like to ask to our panelists?
I just wanted to add that, Carl, I really appreciated your feedback and your responses. And I realized that the conversation was very focused on law enforcement, but of course, the topic of the safety of systemically non-dominant individuals isn't just something that falls on law enforcement. So I did want to note, as social workers, we talk about it because it's our responsibility to administrative policymakers, Bureau of Investigation, just anyone who works with communities is responsible for that. I was just really bringing up the point that it's important to engage the community and try to get out to the end and the root of why it is that people don't feel safe, even though you may have such intricate systems to keep them safe.
I would love to, Fatima, I would love to get up with you again, as I mentioned with Kendall, to discuss further. I think conversations need to be continually had, and I would appreciate more of your feedback on that matter, because that's the way I learn and I grow. So reach out to me and we could definitely discuss further.
Absolutely, I'd love that.
Yeah, Fatima, your perspective has been, certainly very helpful and very important. And I think, I can speak even from our standpoint, when we're working with individuals, and let's say we're working with a victim or survivor, we try to work with them in kind of I'm drawing a blank on it, but an individual centered way, where we're looking at, I know I've done a lot of planning with individuals that may not feel comfortable accessing certain resources, whether it's law enforcement or counseling or, things like that to help them. And so really it's taking that person in their environment and figuring out, what are their supports, what, about their community or their culture, works for them. And so with that being said too, it's also very important, I think, for us to continue with our connections and our conversations with with the centers and partnering with the centers on campus. We work very closely too with our bias impact response team and, other individuals that can help provide us with different perspective and different lens and different understandings of things, so that we're making sure that that our responses and our thought processes and things like that are inclusive, and we're thinking outside of the box when it comes to developing safety plans and making recommendations, because not everything is a fit for everybody and and works for everybody. So I think that's very important, and you sharing your perspective helps us kind of see and hear, where are things, what are students, what are, our folks on campus still experiencing, and how are they still feeling, and what areas do we need to continue to do some work in. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
And I'll add before I turn it over to Professor G for her last thoughts, and then Elizabeth to wrap up. I said this to the panelists and our staff prior to us getting on the meeting, but this session has actually been a year and a half in the makings, and with everything that's been going on, we've had to postpone. This is the start of the conversation that we will continue to have within the School of Social Work, along with the university. So, some of the questions, Fatima, that you brought up, and Kendall, that you brought up, and connecting with our resources on campus, we will continue this dialogue. And this is how we in the School of Social Work continues to get better, and it is to have these hard conversations. And that's one thing that we like to say. We like to have these hard conversations. And so us, as the School of Social Work and the resources that are on campus, of bringing that to the masses and having these hard conversations. And it's definitely for me as a Black male to hear the officer say, you know what, we don't understand that, but we want to connect with this particular community to be able to understand more. So now we can bring light to it and give the resources that are needed to that. So please know, for some of you who are graduating and some of your first years on here, that we in the School of Social Work, the resources on campus, have made a commitment to continue on this dialogue and to continue to move this further. So this is only the start. So I will turn it over to, because we're right now 11:31, to Professor G for her last thoughts, and then Elizabeth will close us out today.
I just want to thank everyone for being here, whether you are a panelist or a participant. And again, yes, this is just a beginning. We've had some conversations in the past. I want to continue this momentum of open dialogue, hard questions. And I want our participants to see that it's very difficult, although this is each one of our panelists' area of expertise, it is still so hard to have these questions and create this dialogue. And so, although not every question could be asked and answered today, I want you to really reflect on how difficult it is to get all these questions coming at you, and appreciate those panelists for being here just as much as I appreciate the participants for thinking and reflecting and asking those difficult questions. So I want to just thank Brent, Sarah, Murray, Carl, and Mike for being here. I've worked with many of them in many different places at many different times, and they're always so dependable, and they will be back. They'll be role players for classes. They will be on panels for my courses. So I want to personally thank you guys, and for all of the faculty and students that made time to be with us today.
Yeah, so much like what Anthony and Professor G were saying, this was kind of an idea that I brought up. And I know with the issue of gun violence, it's such a broad topic that I was like, where do we want to go with this? So my idea was like, okay, we're going to focus on kind of the awareness, the broad picture of it. And then, as Anthony said, hopefully this will be kind of a gateway for future events hopefully in like coming school years, where they'll be able to like focus more in on like those like specific topics related to gun violence, and kind of get into the nitty gritty of it. But I wanted this to be kind of like a gateway to it, and also, like I said, kind of bring about awareness of it, because I feel like with gun violence, it's always something that's like, it's very like talked about in like the media, and then all of a sudden it's not talked about and people kind of forget about it, and then it's a hot topic again, and it's kind of like back and forth. So trying to bring about that awareness for everyone to think of, like, be constantly thinking about. But we appreciate everyone taking their time to attend our program today. I would also like to thank Professor G and our panelists for leading this discussion. I think it was very beneficial for a lot. But I just want to thank you all again, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.